We are the Keyboard Samurai, a podcast focused on sharing insights to help those working in cybersecurity companies, be them technology or services. Each session, your host, Will Klusofsky, aka Will Clue, sits down with professionals in our industry to illuminate topics that will help your security biz, team, or self be better. Let's hack into it now.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining another awesome episode I think we're going to have here. Today, we are joined by Jeffrey. Jeffrey, why don't you go ahead and give us the 20-second, 30-second who you are and why we care.
Yeah, hey, Will, thanks for having me. So I am Jeffrey Wheatman. I am also known in hacker circles as Monkey from my time as a DEF CON goon. I have been involved in cybersecurity for so long, it wasn't even called cybersecurity back then. I've been a consultant, I've been an analyst, and I am currently functioning as cyber risk strategist for Black Kite. We are a third-party risk intelligence platform. And essentially, I get to talk to cool people like you all day. So it's a great job.
That's nice. Yeah, I use Black Kite in a couple of my former employers, so aware of you.
Okay.
So we're going to chat today about, I love the kind of intro you sent over to me, which makes this easy, was, talking about how, you spent all these years working with CISOs and analysts to CISO level on the technical side, and how often salespeople kind of come in and fail to talk about what this technology does that actually the business needs. And I preach all the time about, because I get a lot of startups that'll bring me their stuff, and they understand the blinky lights. But the first question I always ask them is, what's the business problem you solve? And that usually puts a halt on, it causes their brain to kind of screech a little bit. So my first question, why do you think that is? Why do you think that they're kind of stuck in the technology and don't think about the business?
I think that human nature tends to put people in a position where they focus on the stuff that they're the most comfortable with, the area where it's their background, right? It's how they were sort of brought up. And I think technologists come up through the technology ranks. It's what they feel comfortable with. And it's interesting because I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine this morning about what I think the biggest mistake startups make is, and I said the biggest mistake is the creator of the product should never be the CEO, should not be the CRO. They should be like the CTO or director of product. And I just think that we need to force people to come at it from a different angle. And then we get to, okay, well, what's the business problem? What's the solution? As opposed to, here's a laundry list of stuff that we do, because every company can give you the same laundry list or a different one, which they say is better. But at the end of the day, it's about solving business problems. In our particular case, it's about addressing risk to the organization, resilience. How do you make sure that you are protected both for yourself as well as for people you choose to do business with? I think it's really very straightforward as a problem. As a solution, not as much.
Yeah, is it the it's funny because this is one of those things where people ask me if I'm technical, and my answer is like, well, it depends on who's in the room with me, right? But generally speaking, yeah, I'm a little more technical than the average, the CFO or whatever, for sure. And so I guess that's kind of my next question as we think about this is like you said, the person who creates the product being very technical. What should they be doing then how do they supplement? How do they figure out that if they're actually solving a business problem, and then how do they effectively kind of build that communication and even sales approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there are a couple different ways I think to approach it. I think the first one is really kind of looking deep inside and saying, why did you create this in the first place? So as an example, our founder was an ethical hacker for NATO. And he went to the general and he said, hey, we're doing pretty well, but our partners are doing terribly. And you know what the general said? As compared to what? And John then went, oh, that's actually a really good question.
Right.
And I think we need to start kind of asking those questions, right? Why do you think this is a good idea? So that's number one. I think another way to sort of approach it is to actually get out of our comfort zone a little bit and go and talk to people in other disciplines. Talk to people in finance, talk to people in operations, and say, hey, we think this is a problem. Do you see it as a problem for you? And kind of getting their feedback and understanding, is this really a thing? And then the third thing, and this is somewhat unique if you've gone out and raised money, go to your investors and ask your investors. They'll give you advisory people to help you with your advisory board, right? Because those are people who are coming at it from the other side. And I do some advisory work in addition to my day
same
job.
here.
And one of the companies I was doing some work with, they were pitching an investor group, and they showed me a deck, and I went, okay, this is an awesome deck if you're talking to a CISO. But you're not. You're talking to an investor. And you know what investors care about? How am I getting my money out and how fast?
Right.
So kind of understanding your audience, and I'm a big proponent of storytelling. I think it's very underutilized, but I think we need to tell stories, and the punchline, the end, the sort of moral of the story needs to be aligned with the problem that we're trying to solve. And then kind of just to layer on that is, as founders, we need to be mindful of the fact that not all criticism is negative. Some criticism needs to be taken within the context of constructive criticism. Right? Have you thought about this? Are you able to also solve this problem? Can you work with companies that I'm already working with? Right? We do a lot of that. We have a particular solution that solves a very important set of problems. We don't solve everything, and we have to work with partners. So I think all of those are kind of different ways of getting that. And then I'm a really big proponent of workshopping and scenario planning. And I do it a little bit differently in that when I run these things, and I've done hundreds of them, I always give people a different job. So you're the CIO, nah, not today. Today you're the CFO. You're the CEO, nah, today you're going to be the CISO. And it doesn't always quite go the way you want, but what always happens is, wow, I never thought about it that way. And I consider that a win, right? If you can get people to look at it from your side and you are forced to look at it from their side, that's really, really powerful.
Yeah, that's smart. That's something I think a lot of technical people struggle with. I know, like for me in my career, like I made a conscious effort to be intentionally do that. I think I posted about this on LinkedIn. Like I remember when I first got into the corporate world, I had a mentor who he was a director, and he was running the dev team, and he used to run the warehouse, and he'd ran another part of operations. He was just like a leader that you could just plug and play. And I was like, he told me the same thing. He said, don't just focus on, sort of your siloed careers, like think about otherwise. And that's what we've done. Like we talked about before you joined, like we've kind of done that both ourselves. The other thing too, I'd like you saying there too, is the, that business case, again, like being able to think about it from that perspective. I would expect, like if I'm a VC or a PE, any firm, like I'm going to want to know, like if you're asking for money, what's the business problem you're solving, right? And that interoperability is another one. I've had conversations, arguments, we'll call it whatever you will, with people, because they're like, well, our tool does this thing better. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Who cares about that thing? Is it the analyst that's using it? Is it the CISO? Is it the owner? Like, where in the business is that alleviating pain? Because if you're solving a problem that is going to save some analyst 15 minutes of the day, but it's going to cost the CISO $1 million, that's a bad trade-off. Right?
Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting you say that, though, because I always sort of caution people about trying to do ROI for security, because it's really hard to do. There are some exceptions, but you can talk about trade-offs, and you can talk about, right now we're super well exposed, and here's some information and some data to support that. Here are some investments we can make that will cut that dramatically. Can I tell you it's going to cut it by $1,319,012? No, and if I did, you should throw me out of here. But I can tell you that right now we are much more exposed than our competitors, much more exposed than other people in our vertical. And, one of the things I've been hearing, and I've sort of have two minds about it, is that compliance is becoming a big driver again. Which I find frustrating, because as we know, compliance and security are not the same thing. But with a lot of the new regulation, the SEC regulation that got passed in the States in 2023, DORA, which actually just kicked in a couple of weeks ago in the EU, is really focused on the concept of resilience. How do you keep your business up and running no matter what happens? Well, that's a business problem, not a technology problem. And I think that gives us some really interesting kind of things. And when I was an analyst at Gartner, I can't tell you how many hundreds of technologies I saw, and I went, wow, this is a really cool technology. And 6 months later, they were gone.
Yeah.
Why? Because they either didn't understand or couldn't articulate what business problem they're trying to solve. And I think you said it. Who's going to care, right? I do a lot of stuff. I coach people going in front of boards. I've been doing that for years. It's actually a really fun thing. And I always say, like, here's some questions. Who on the board is going to care? Right? Who's in trouble if it doesn't go well? And you got to start asking those kinds of questions, which will then help you to, sort of build better stories. And it's a challenge, right, Will? Because everybody in an organization is incented a different way, right?
Yep.
My job, I'm deemed successful based on a certain set of criteria. My salespeople are deemed successful based on closing a certain amount of business. My customer success people, they're measured on retention, right? And our CEO is measured by how happy the board is with them.
Right.
Those things are not always aligned. And to my mind, that's a big problem, whether you're a small vendor, a medium size, or, these really large, like kind of mega vendors. I think they continue to have those sort of alignment problems. And when you do that, everybody tells different stories. And then as a buyer, I go, well, she said this and they said that and he said this. And now I don't know what you guys do. And that's a huge issue.
That's super interesting because, like, it just triggered a bunch of stuff in my brain because I've done a lot of sales enablement, which is making sure that everybody tells the same story. And I've done a lot of that, like, strategy for those businesses. And everything you just said is a lot of times what I see a failure to be, which is, look, as the company, what's your goal? Like, have big, hefty, lofty goals. And then take that down. What's the C-suite's goals? How do they affect that? Take that down, VP, director, so that every individual contributor goes to work every day and knows that I do this, that impacts this, that impacts that. Then it's easy for everybody to tell the same story because they all understand the point of the mission, right?
Right. And even if they don't agree, at least they understand. Like, I'm very big, and I tell my kids this all the time. Understanding the motivation of the person on the other end of the call, the conference, whatever, I think is really, 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 really important. And it's a continuing challenge. And let's face it, right? Cybersecurity is a very difficult discipline. I mentor a lot of young people, and I tell them, if you don't love it, you should find another career, because it is stressful and difficult and unrewarding unless you love it. If you love it, then all that stuff gets flipped.
Right.
And I just think that collectively we need to get sort of, I think it's a very simple message. Yes, cybersecurity is only one risk you manage. However, that risk has an outsized impact on everything else. You get hit with ransomware, you can't pay your bills. You can't pay your people. You can't ship product. You can't advertise. You can't run your website. Well, all of those things have absolutely direct connection back to hitting your business goals. And you talked about that kind of deconstruction. And I love that. I'm a big proponent of value chains, which is created by Michael Porter. Everyone knows him for Porter's 5 Forces. But the value chain approach to me is huge because it starts with the big giant business goals. All right, we want to increase revenue by 50%. All right, well, what processes are required to do that? And then what technology enables that? And what are our exposures and what are we doing, right? And then that way you can tell this whole story. Simple, but not necessarily easy.
Right.
And that's where I think people struggle.
I'm laughing because I just had a call this morning catching up with an old colleague and, working for these firms, and basically they set revenue goals based on what the VC or the PE firm gave them and said they need to make. And he's like, that's not how you do that. Like, that's not realistic. Like, how do we know, what's the market look like? How do we figure out how to do all the selling? You can't just pull a number out of the air.
No, but everybody does it. Yeah, everyone does it. And then to make it even worse, you go, all right, we're going to do $50 million in ARR. Okay, well, market says 27.5% of that goes towards marketing. Okay, marketing, here's your budget, right? Nobody asks marketing what they want to do, right? Sales should be X percent, operations should be this. And then they assign these pots of money. And then again, those people don't talk to each other. And we end up with, these continuing problems. And, I was talking with an old friend of mine, and he said, look, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars on cybersecurity, and it ain't fixed. And no one seems to be screaming about it, right? You would think I gave all this money to these vendors. They're not doing anything. I've never met a CISO who I told me, hey, I woke up this morning and I got to tell you, I have never been so happy that I invested all this money in this tool. Never. Do we hear that? Right? Well, there's a problem there, and we need to kind of figure out what that is. And that's why podcasts like yours, and I do a lot of work. I have a lot of friends who are on the marketing side, and
Mm-hmm.
I actually get a lot of value out of talking to them, because I feel like we all keep doing the same things, and we need to change it up a little bit. And the one thing I hear from a lot of my CISO contacts, they're tired of being sold.
Oh
And
yeah.
I had a friend of mine reach out to me the other day, and he's like, "Hey, you got to talk to your BDRs, the business development guys." And I go, "Why?" He said, "Well, they connected to me on LinkedIn." I go, "Dude, they don't know we're friends. They don't know we're friends." He's like, "If I want to buy Black Kite, I'll come to you." I'm like, "But they don't know that.
Yeah,
They're just doing their job." And he went, "Oh, I guess that's true." So, it's like, it's this constant conflict, and we need to figure out how to kind of smooth it over. It needs to be mutually beneficial to the buyer and the seller. And I just don't feel like in a lot of cases that
yeah.
is the case right now.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of GTM. That's really that's probably one of the things I enjoy doing the most of, aside from like talking to clients. But that because that problem persists everywhere, and I have it happen all the time. I think I've had multiple episodes where we've talked about like badge scanning, and then my partner their SDRs are sending me emails, and I'm like, you didn't even bother to look at the company I work for and realize we're a reseller of your product, or we're already consuming the tool, right? And the SDR is not getting the right training. They need to have the right conversations. It's baffling to me. It's frustrating. So I think, having all those talk together. The other thing too on the marketing side is, and I've dealt with this a little bit recently. It's, well, marketing, like, they should be listening to the business, or at least in our case, the security practitioners, to say, hey, these are the things that CISOs care about. This is what's happening. Or if they're fortunate enough to have like a CISO board or advisory board, or their best clients, not just being like, well, we have this new offering, or we got this certification, or we bought this tool, so let's go ahead and market it and invest all that time into it.
And it's hard. And I always, we have a really good chief product officer at Black Kite, a guy named Chuck Schauber. And he said something to me really interesting, which I never really thought about. He said, "My job as chief product officer is to decide what we don't do."
Mm-hmm.
And I never really thought about it that way. And that's like a brilliant way to look at it. And, he and I have some really good sort of, I don't want to say conflict, but because we come at it from such different perspectives. But the outcome from that is really what we need to do, right? Which is, okay, how do we identify the problems? How do we solve the problems? And then how do we communicate the fact that, number one, you all have this problem, and number two, we have a great way to solve it in a cost-effective and easy to deploy way. And it sounds so simple, and yet it's just not.
Well, so many people fail at product management, and that's the thing. Like, because that's how I look at it. Is, like you said, if we know what we know what, everybody's got a roadmap full of stuff to do. Well, if I go talk to the client and actually ask them what they need, then that's going to make it very easy. And then you're going to be able to tell the right story, because you're going to develop the product in the right way. You're going to have, you've got your standard content around that's going to be used for sales and used for marketing, and like having that good process in place. And I talk about this part too for services. You need to have that. People who,
Yep.
I managed a consulting portfolio for a long time, which is, it's hard because there's a lot of services, most organizations can offer, but you still have to have that same mindset with like, what do we do? How do we build this out? Is it valuable? How do we upscale this, downscale it, change it up, all that kind of stuff.
Right. And from a services perspective, we have to articulate why it's more effective for you to pay me to do it as opposed to do it yourself.
Sure.
Right. Because that's always the thing. Let's grow it. Let's build it. And I built consulting practices. It is not fun.
Actually enjoy it.
It is fun, but it's not fun.
Yeah.
It is fun, but it's not fun.
Building the pipeline and start like hiring the pipeline, which is one of the things we're going to go off a tangent, but I don't care. That's one of the things, like when I talk to some clients, like that's always a challenge. Is like, well, we sell it and then we hire. I was like, no, hire to the pipeline. Look at your pipeline and what you have.
Right.
And if you have the ability if you have good accountability in that pipeline, when things are going to close, who to trust and who to buy on. And it's not just a guessing game where every sales guy changes the numbers at the end of the month to the next month. Getting that pipeline prediction, that forecast sorted out will make hiring easy.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. You got to hire, and this is actually the brilliance of my CEO is that he did exactly that, right? He too many companies raise all this money and they build this company that's actually 50 times bigger than you actually are. And he
Right.
was like, we're not going to do that, right? We do sort of our version of just in time. And I think
Mhm.
that's really, really smart because you look when the economy sort of I don't know, spun around a little bit last
Yeah,
year,
yeah,
companies were laying people off like crazy. Why? Because they hired so far ahead of where they were. They had this overhead and they were being forced by investors to cut
yeah.
back. And I just, it means sometimes you miss some of the explosive growth, but I think it's slow and steady wins the race. And I just feel like there's too much short-sightedness. And that's not just true in our space. I think that's true in all markets, right?
Yeah, that's just
What do you
that's
what could you do for me today?
right, right. Well, Jeffrey, this is awesome, man. Where can everybody find you on the interwebs should they want to?
You do it. So the easiest thing to do is connect to me on LinkedIn. I am JN Wheatman, or you can just search for Jeffrey Wheatman. I am the only one out there. I also host a podcast as well called Risk and Reels, where we talk about movies and cybersecurity. And if you're interested in hearing more about what we do at Black Kite, feel free to check us out at blackkite.com, or you can ping me directly, and I'm happy to turn you on because as you may have picked up from my conversation, Will, I'm not a sales guy or a marketing guy. I am a guy that likes to help people solve problems.
That's
So
a man after my own heart
that's me in
there.
a nutshell.
I appreciate that. And we'll have all the info down in the description too. So thanks, Jeffrey. It's been awesome.
Oh, my pleasure, Will. Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for enjoying Keyboard Samurai Podcast. If you'd like to engage, find Will on LinkedIn at /WillClue or visit at willclue.me. That's WILKLU.me for more info. Disconnecting now. Synac you later.